This story, Mr. Noisy. Mr. Noisy was a very, very noisy person. For example, if Mr. Noisy was reading this story to you, he'd be shouting at the top of his voice, and the top of Mr. Noisy's voice is a very loud place indeed. You can hear it 100 miles away. For example, when most people sneeze, you can hear that an extra but achoo. When Mr. Noisy sneezes, you can hear him in the next country. Now this story starts when Mr. Noisy was asleep in bed, in his bedroom in his house, which is on top of a hill. He was snoring, and you can well imagine when Mr. Noisy snores, or is hearing. It sounds like a very often snore. Then Mr. Noisy's alarm clock went out. Mr. Noisy's alarm clock sounds like no other alarm clock in the world. Sounds like a fire engine. Mr. Noisy woke up. So it lived in Wobbetown, which is at the bottom of Mr. Noisy's hill. Later that day, Mr. Noisy decided that he had to go shopping. He went out of his house, shutting the door behind him. Bang! The door wobbled. The house wobbled. The whole hill wobbled down, wobbled. Even a bird flying high wobbled. Then Mr. Noisy walked down the hill. Clunk, clunk, clunk. He walked into the baker shop. Crash! The door opened. Bang! With the door shut. I'd like a loaf of bread, boomed Mr. Noisy to Mrs. Crumb, the baker's wife. Mrs. Crumb trembled for the loaf. Then Mr. Noisy walked along the street to the butcher. Clunk, clunk, clunk. He walked into the butcher shop. Crash with the door. Bang! The door shut. I'd like a piece of meat, boomed Mr. Noisy to Mr. Bacon the butcher. Mr. Bacon trembled, so then some meat. Afterwards, Mrs. Crumb met Mr. Bacon in the street. We really must do something about Mr. Noisy being so noisy, she said. Absolutely, replied Mr. Bacon, but what? I know, said Mrs. Crumb, and she whispered into Mr. Bacon's ear. Mr. Bacon smiled a small smile, screwed to the grin. Mrs. Crumb, he said, I think you have the answer to that. The following day, Mr. Noisy again went shopping down to Walla Town. Clump, clump, clump. He went into Mrs. Crum's shop. I'd like a loaf of bread, he boomed. Sorry, what did you say? Mrs. Crumb pretending not to hear. I'd like a loaf of bread, Mr. Noisy shouted. Sorry, said Mrs. Crumb, putting her hand to her ear. Can you speak up, please? I'd like a loaf of bread, roared Mr. Noisy. Can't hear you, cried Mrs. Crumb. Mr. Noisy gave up and went out. Mr. Noisy went into Mr. Bacon's shop. I'd like a piece of meat, he boomed. Mr. Bacon turned not to notice. I'd like a piece of meat, Mr. Noisy shouted. Did you say something? Asked Mr. Bacon. I'd like a piece of meat, roared Mr. Noisy. Right, said Mr. Bacon. Mr. Noisy gave up and went home. He went to bed hungry. The day after Mr. Noisy tried again, he went into Mrs. Crumb's shop. I'd like a loaf of bread, he boomed. A what? Asked Mrs. Crumb. Mr. Noisy started shouting at the very top of his voice. A loaf of... And he stopped. He said quietly, I'd like a loaf of bread, please, Mrs. Crumb. Mrs. Crumb smiled certainly. Then Mr. Noisy went into Mr. Bacon's shop. I'd like a piece of meat, he boomed. Did you say something, asked Mr. Bacon. Yes, I did, shouted Mr. Noisy. I said I'd like a... He stopped. And he said quiet. I'd like a piece of meat, please, Mr. Bacon. Mr. Bacon smiled my pleasure. So, carrying his bread and meat, Mr. Noisy set off up the hill. Clump, clump, clump. And then it stopped. Then he thought, you know what he did? He tiptoed. And tiptoe was something Mr. Noisy never tried before. It was fun. Mr. Noisy arrived at his front door. He passed his hand to open the door. Stopped. And he thought, do you know what he did? He opened the door very quietly, stepped inside, and he shut the door very gently, quietly, and gently were two things Mr. Noisy never tried before either. That was fun. To being something, but then, you know, Mr. Noisy isn't anything as noisy as it used to be. You know, something else that people all the time to like say Mrs. Crumb and Mr. Bacon and doing something else. Mr. Noisy has learned how to whisper. Ah.